Come on in, pull up a chair and take a load off. Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host, here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I am going to answer a couple of questions which are posed to me quite often. And before I dive in, I do want to mention none of this is scripted. It's all off the cuff. If you're familiar with the Gaming Gang, you know that's kind of my modus operandi anyway. And this is just my opinion. It's all based on my own personal experiences. So the first question I'm going to look to answer today is, what is the OSR? So I get a lot of people who email me more along the lines of, hey, Jeff, in your opinion, what is the OSR? And there are a lot of definitions out there. In fact, you can round up 10 old school gamers, ask each of them, what is the OSR? And you're going to get 10 different answers. Some of them might be similar, but they're all going to be different. And my answer might be very different from what you're expecting as well. So stay tuned for that. The other question is kind of a follow-up to the first, and it is the OSR filled with right-wing extremists? People do ask me that a lot. And they hear stories or they've seen something troubling online, maybe something unnerving that they've heard about. I'm going to do my best to answer that question as well. So, first of all, what is the OSR? Well, it's a form of gaming. It's a genre which came around mid 2000s. So it's been around for quite some time. And funny enough, even to this point, we can't get on the same page to decide what the O, the S, and the R represent. So some folks out there will say it's the old school revival. I myself personally like old school Renaissance. I think that rolls off the tongue. It sounds nice. Pretty much sums up what this is. So there is that. I've heard people say it's just old school rules, old school rulings, and some other OSRs as well. Now, the two you're going to hear the most is old school revival and my favorite, old school Renaissance. So for many people, not necessarily myself, but for many people, the OSR boils down to games that are built upon the core mechanics from early editions of Dungeons and Dragons or those early editions of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I don't necessarily feel that's the case. I think personally, there are modern games that I really do consider to be part of the OSR that many other people don't. I'll talk about those a bit later in the video. But to me, the OSR is more of a philosophy than something which is mechanical. But as I mentioned, a lot of people out there feel it's something that has to do with the early editions of D&D. So we're looking at original Dungeons and Dragons, which came out in 1974, which was available as a little wooden box, and then it was a brown box, and then finally it was a white box. And that's why a lot of people refer to original Dungeons and Dragons as white box D&D. We also have the basic box set, which was written by Dr. Holmes. We have the two separate basic and expert sets written by Tom Moldvay. We've got the BECMI releases. Those are also considered to be old school Renaissance, as is Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Now, there are people out there who say second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons should be part of the OSR, and then other people say, oh, absolutely not. There's no way 2E AD&D is OSR. As I said, to me, I feel it's more of a philosophy. It's more of an approach to role-playing at the game table, both players and game masters as well. So to me, it's a mindset, really. So there are some tent poles, in my opinion, of the OSR, and I'll tell you what those are. First of all, there's a focus on player ability and player ingenuity as opposed to player character attributes and feats and abilities and skills, say, as an example there. So the modern approach, when a group of players faces some sort of challenge, they all start looking at their player character sheets to see what skills or abilities or what they have that's going to be applicable that they can apply to overcome this challenge. That's not the case with the old school Renaissance. Old school Renaissance, the players are coming up with a plan. They're coming up with ideas. They're not looking at the character sheet to try to figure out, okay, so what do I need to roll against to be able to succeed? Now, I find with the OSR approach, there's far more back and forth with the players and the game master, far more storytelling going on. Something else to keep in mind is characters are heroic, but they're not superheroes. So low-level characters are very squishy. Low-level characters get killed. High-level characters in OSR games buy the farm as well. So there's a higher lethality to combat in the OSR as opposed to the modern games. And I think one of the reasons is that these days, most game masters are actually afraid, or at least reluctant, to kill off a player character, let alone have a total party kill. And it's because players invest a lot of time into creating intricate backstories for their characters before even playing a single session. You'll find in the old school Renaissance that the player character generation is pretty quick, and the players don't invest a lot of time into intricate backstories because the stories of the characters grow from the adventuring itself. So that is something that you see far more with the old school Renaissance, and you'll tend to see characters of all levels end up being killed in old school Renaissance adventures far more than you will modern adventures. Now, something that's talked about quite a lot, but I don't necessarily agree with, is the lack of balance in encounters from the old school Renaissance. Now, I know modern game design, modern adventure design, we've got our challenge ratings, and there's all these equations to figure out to make sure that you've got level appropriate encounters. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Now, there is kind of a misconception that there's absolutely no balancing going on in old school Renaissance adventures. And that's really not the case, especially if you take a look at published adventures, both for older editions of D&D as well as modern OSR adventures. You're going to find, say it's a dungeon, and if the dungeon is aimed at levels 1 to 3, the first level of the dungeon is going to be populated mainly by one hit die monsters. And then you get down to the second level and they're populated by, you guessed it, 2 hit dice monsters. So there is some balancing built in to these encounters. Now, where that whole not balanced aspect comes from is that there are going to be encounters which are designed for the player characters not to engage in combat or try to avoid altogether. And that's what people mean by when they say encounters aren't balanced. Something else to actually kind of follow up that with is that there's also a misconception in the OSR that if the characters end up in combat, somehow that's a fail state, that they've screwed up somehow because you're always trying to avoid combat in the OSR. That's not really true because players want their characters to get into combat. Players enjoy combat. Players enjoy beating up on monsters and NPCs and getting treasure. Now, the juggling act with the old school Renaissance is to have enough combat encounters mixed in with, you know, social encounters and other encounters that can be overcome, or challenges to be overcome by methods other than combat. So, something important to keep in mind also. Character advancement is different in the OSR than you would find in more modern role playing games. The OSR doesn't have milestone events where it's like, oh, you're automatically leveling up. No, you've got experience points, and various different things give you experience points, and you must get those experience points to level up. So it isn't as if, well, as long as you get to this point into the adventure, now you're going to be a new level. That doesn't happen with the OSR. It's also to keep in mind that in the OSR, that you're also looking at your advancement, your XPs are tied into exploration and treasure. Usually not tied into killing monsters. Now, granted, depending on what edition the rules might be based on, or the actual edition itself that you might be using those rules for, there may be some experience from defeating monsters. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to defeat them in combat to get the experience. But for the most part, the majority of your experience points are going to come from treasure. So it's important for you to get treasure, which also leads me to the fact that time management and resource management are also very important in the old school Renaissance, not so much with the modern game design. And that's because you only have so much time available to you. You only have so many resources available. And it's one of the reasons why you try to avoid wandering monsters in the OSR, because once again, you're probably not earning experience points from them. They don't carry treasure normally. And they're basically using up your resources. They're using up spells, potions, your arrows, your bolts, your hit points. And keeping in mind, in the OSR, it's not that easy to regain your spell slots and your hit points. There are no like short rests and long rests where, oh, you took a long rest, you've got all your magic slots back. That does not happen in the OSR. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. I think the last thing that people discuss with the OSR, and I think sometimes this is another misconception, is the rulings over rules. And I have mentioned this myself from time to time, one of the appeals to me of the OSR. But I think a lot of people out there think, oh, the rulings over rules means that, you know, the original editions or these new retro clones of these older editions of D&D didn't need rules, didn't need these extra rules, because it was assumed the game master and the players would come up with some decision, right? That a judgment would be made. In fact, that's why your game master in early editions of role-playing games a lot of times is referred to as the referee or the judge. That's why for decades, my friends and I always referred to a game master as the referee or the ref. Oh, I'm the ref for Call of Cthulhu. I always ref the Call of Cthulhu games. I never referred to myself as a keeper, even though that was the term and still is the term for the game master in Call of Cthulhu. But what you end up finding is that there were no rules about certain situations in these editions simply because they hadn't come up. Because I can guarantee you, if there were rules in the book that made sense, players would use them. Game masters would use them. Now, for me, I think the rulings over rules aspect that I find most important is when you don't know a rule or you're not sure of a rule. So a lot of people these days with modern game designs want to make sure they get the rule correct. So they're going to stop the action and they're going to look it up. To me, that's one of the worst things you can possibly do at your game table, is bring all the action to a screeching halt by looking up a rule. Now, the old school Renaissance way of doing it is to either make a judgment there on the fly, and in future situations like what you just made a judgment about, you're going to utilize the same judgment, or just come up with a judgment and tell your players, hey, you know what? I'm not sure about this rule, but what I'll do is when we finish up this session, I'm going to look it up so that I make sure that we get it right the next time. But I don't want to bring the whole game to a crashing halt simply to look up a rule. So that's where the rulings over rules really comes into play, is make an intelligent decision as far as what's going to happen, be it in the best interest of the story or the best interest in the player characters, what have you. But still, make a ruling, don't bring everything to a screeching halt. So there are some thoughts about what I feel makes a game old school Renaissance. So, and I know, once again, just my opinion. I mean, there are a lot of people out there who are going to disagree with my opinion on what is OSR, and that's fine. Now, the second question, a little trickier. And I do get this question quite often from people. Is the OSR filled with right-wing extremists? Well, first thing that I would look to do is define a right-wing extremist. So I'll give you kind of my definition. I find a right-wing extremist tends to be hateful, bigoted, racist. They don't believe that everyone should have an even playing field. They feel that some folks should have rights that other folks don't have, or some folks should lose rights that other folks have. Maybe they're looking to push a fascist government or an authoritative government. To me, that's a right-wing extremist. Now, if you follow the Gaming Gang, if you ever watch any of the live shows that I do, you probably already know I'm a liberal. I'm a Democrat. I am absolutely a liberal. So I have to point out, just because somebody's politics are to the right of me, does not make them a right-wing extremist. Now, for yourself, maybe it does. If that's the case, I don't know what to tell you. I will tell you, you're far too black and white, right? No shades of gray, no middle area. But in my opinion, people who have politics that are to the right of me tend to be conservative. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't people out there who are right-wing extremists, and I'm certainly not telling you that they don't exist in the OSR, because they do. They are there. Got to be honest, we have bad actors from all political stripes in our hobby, unfortunately. But that's how the world is. Our hobby is just a small piece of the world around us. So we have bad folk on both sides of the aisle. But I will point out that many old school Renaissance game systems and adventures are written by people who are older. Now, that's not to say that there aren't young people who absolutely adore the OSR or are really interested in the old school Renaissance. There are many who are playing old school games because they enjoy that mindset. They enjoy that game philosophy from the old school Renaissance. But many of the creators are my age or older because they have a fond nostalgia for these early editions of Dungeons and Dragons, because that's what they played when they were kids, or they were in high school, or when they were in college. So also keep in mind that it is a fact. This is not an opinion. This is a fact that traditionally, as people age, their politics become more conservative. Now, I'm not using this as a blanket statement because, for one, I've gotten older and my politics haven't gotten more conservative, but traditionally that is the case. So, if you're wondering, will you find more conservative political viewpoints in the OSR? The answer to that, I would say, is yes. That you would probably see more conservative political viewpoints than you will liberal political viewpoints. Now, as always, there's extremes on both sides. So it's important to keep in mind, yes, you're probably going to encounter people who are more conservative if you happen to be a liberal type. Doesn't mean there aren't liberals and people on the far left enjoying the OSR. Don't think that for a second. All I'm saying is you are more apt to experience encountering people with more conservative views. That's all I'm saying there. Now, I did get an email from somebody saying that they were on 4chan and they went into the OSR forum and they were shocked by what they read. So my reaction to that is, for one, what are you doing on 4chan? How did you end up there? Because to be honest, if you're going to swim in the toilet, you're going to bump up against shit. There's no getting around that. So I was sort of like, okay, what were you expecting to find? I mean, because for one, 4chan is a creepy place, and 4chan is like the land of the trolls, which is something else to keep in mind too. I do see more trolls in the OSR than I might see with, say, a 5e community or a Call of Cthulhu community. It's not like, oh my God, I can't be part of this. But you got to keep in mind what community you're hanging out with. So if you're looking at an OSR community over on, say, RPG.net, you are going to have a far, far different experience than you would if you were over on 4chan. So you got to keep that in mind as well. So I know people contact me all the time saying, hey, you know what? You talk about the OSR, you share first looks and reviews of OSR rule sets and adventures and things like that. And I'm really curious. I'd be really interested in checking it out. But I hear these stories. And I'm going to tell you, once again, there are bad actors out there on both sides of the aisle. But you will tend to find, if they are bad actors in the OSR, they are on the right side as opposed to the left side. But I certainly recommend, if you have any interest in the OSR, check out any number of fantastic releases from people who are certainly nowhere near being right-wing extremists. So right off the top of my head, you can check out Old School Essentials from Necrotic Gnome. And I have reviewed all 3 of their core books. They've got their classic rules tome, which is basic and expert. They've also got their advanced fantasy, which kind of boils advanced Dungeons and Dragons down for basic and expert. So there's that. I think they are fantastic. So you're not going to encounter any strangeness there. We've also got Castles and Crusades, which I know a lot of people out there say, that's not really OSR. To me, it's got an OSR mindset. Mechanically, it is not necessarily OSR. It's more D20 than anything else. But concept-wise, mindset-wise, Castles and Crusades from Troll Lord Games is most certainly OSR. So there's something there. Now, all of these are going to utilize things that are different mechanically. They're not all the same mechanically. Then I would also include another system that there are many people out there who are like, oh no, that's not OSR, that I think at its heart is OSR, is Dungeon Crawl Classics. I think if you are looking for like a sword and sorcery sort of role-playing system that captures that very well, I gotta say, Dungeon Crawl Classics is excellent. And to me, Dungeon Crawl Classics is old school Renaissance. And for many other people, it's not. I'm just saying for myself, it is. If you really want to go OSR, you can always just get copies of the original games. It's very easy to get your hands on OD&D or the Holmes Basic or Tom Moldvay's Basic Expert or Advanced Dungeons and Dragons books. They are available in PDF. You can get them in PDF. Unlike 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, which you will never find in PDF, you'll find on D&D Beyond, but not in PDF. You will find the older editions of Dungeons and Dragons, very affordable in PDF. So that is an option as well. One of the cool things about the old school Renaissance 2 is it's very easy to port adventures over from various different systems within the OSR. So far easier to take an AD&D adventure and port it over to, say, Old School Essentials than you would think. It is very easy to do so. All right, so there you have the answers to my 2 questions I get a lot. What, in my opinion, is the OSR, and is the OSR filled with right-wing extremists? So there you have my answers. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, ding that bell, because it'll not only let you know when I upload videos such as this, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings, right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more that you won't find here on the YouTube channel. Thanks once again for joining me, and until I see you next time, here's hoping each and every one of you gets to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.
Oh, hey, you're still here. That's okay. You don't have to leave just yet. In fact, why don't you subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel right here, or take a peek at the latest live stream, or even find out what YouTube recommends you check out from the channel. And of course, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thanks again for watching.